Alright, hello everyone. Today we'll be going over Monadology by Leibniz, and I want to start it off with a few simple questions. So, you know Leibniz?
Yeah, isn't he like the physics calculus guy?
Founder calculus? Yeah, he also did philosophy. And so we're going to be asking a few central questions today to see if we also come to Leibniz's conclusion. So, first off, let me get a sense. What is consciousness to y'all? And then I'll explain what it is to Leibniz in a moment.
Well,
Yeah?
I guess it's just like, it's hard to explain exactly, but just like being aware of your surroundings and just being aware of, I guess, yourself, like being aware that you exist.
Self-awareness? Okay.
Yeah, self-awareness basically. I think is an indicator of consciousness.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, perfect. So that's kind of what it is. That's how we colloquially define consciousness. Leibniz's definition is more technical. He defines consciousness as existing on a range, like a scale, in degrees. And consciousness doesn't necessarily require awareness, but that's one of the many pillars that can be a part of consciousness, or that can increase its degree towards clarity. So Leibniz says that consciousness is just the state of perception, and that awareness is one of those. So, so Leibniz asks, in the human, where is consciousness? Where is it located? Does anyone have an idea of where consciousness might be located? Yeah?
In the brain?
In the brain. Okay. Anyone else might think it's different? Okay, so that's like the modern understanding of what consciousness is. But Leibniz questions, if consciousness emerges through the brain, one, how do those processes occur? How do we result in consciousness? How do we result in self-awareness? Yeah?
What do you mean by located? Because I feel like consciousness is not like a physical thing that's located somewhere. It's like,
it's just like it's like a concept, right?
Yeah, like I think that your brain processing allows you to experience consciousness, but I don't think that it's like it's actually it's not like consciousness is physically anywhere, right?
Well, perfect, because that's exactly Leibniz's point. He says that there's no consciousness anywhere, or it's not a physical thing, but there are still things on this earth that have consciousness, that have perception. We know that because we experience them ourselves, and so those things, Leibniz says, must be non-physical. And so Leibniz takes a core premise here. One, there are things, right? So there exist things. And I'm purposely using the word things, which is vague and not defined right now, because we'll realize that what we envision as things right now are different from what Leibniz deduces they must logically be. Okay, so there are things. Are those things composite? Are those things made up of multiple things? Yes or no? Yes. I can take off my water bottle cap. It's now two things. Now it's one thing. Maybe it's not a thing. But Leibniz says that things are composite. Two. There exist composite things. And so, thus, if they are composite, they must be comprised of smaller things, right? They must be comprised of smaller things. And let me ask you, are you all familiar with mereology?
No.
Okay, mereology, it's a separate branch of study that we're not going to get into today, but basically mereology says that if composite things are comprised of smaller things and they're able to be divided into those smaller things, or even if they're not able to be like physically divided, they must be comprised of smaller things, which means that things can be divided and parted until they become something that's not a composite thing, which Leibniz calls a simple. Or not just Leibniz, that's like a term in mereology. Simple. So there exist simples.
So are those like subatomic particles or like?
Well, that's the question.
Idea.
So the conventional understanding is simples would be like subatomic particles or something, or this might be like an atom. But let me ask you, can you have two halves of an atom? Does an atom take up space?
Oh, yeah, you can.
Okay, an atom takes up space, right?
Yeah, you can divide an atom into like particles, as we know, or you can split atoms. I mean.
Yeah, or even a quark. Even a quark has like a set amount of energy that can be transferred or something, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a set amount of energy that's transferred, but it's not usually like a piece of it. Like,
Well, then how is it transferred? That's Leibniz's question.
oh, you're saying that like if you.
We'll get into that in a second. Wait. So, sorry, we're getting ahead of ourselves. First of all, there exist symbols which Leibniz actually says are non-material. So that's kind of where Leibniz is revolutionary. Symbols is a broader category of those non-divisible things that might be like atoms or something. Atoms as in the philosophical understanding of atoms, not the scientific understanding. But there's a specific subsection of symbols that have perception, which Leibniz calls monads. They have this thing called qualia, which is the ability, qualia contains qualia, so, God, this marker is not good. Qualia, which Leibniz defines as the ability to perceive things, the property of having perception and having some degree of recognition of what that perception is / an interpretation of that perception. And Leibniz says that everything is made up of monads, self-sufficient monads, self-sufficient, God, can you all even see this?
No.
Okay, perfect. You might want to zoom in if it's tough. Anyways, Leibniz says that everything is made up of self-sufficient monads that have qualia, and they're self-contained, as in they don't interact with one another. And he says that they're non-physical because they must necessarily be so, because if they were physical, then we would have to have answers to the questions of what shape is this physical object? Well, if it has a shape, then it can be cut into half. You can have a left half of the shape and a right half of the shape, which is impossible. Yeah. So Leibniz deduces these must be things that actually don't exist. They're non-material things with qualia, and the states of qualia are the defining characteristics of them. And so this is Leibniz's argument for the logical syllogism, essentially, to prove that religion or some God, some omnipotent God outside of the universe must exist. This is where Leibniz and Spinoza have core differences because they were influenced by each other, agreed, disagreed on some parts. But Spinoza says that the God of our universe must be within, it must be nature, it must be equivalent. Leibniz says that God must transcend the universe, must transcend nature and being, and he distinguishes God as actually a type of monad. So Leibniz says that there are 4 monads. Let me put them down here. First, there's the supreme monad. There's the, I believe it's, the supreme monad. Oh. Which is God. Okay? And so this monad has created the next 3 monads, the next 3 sets of monads, and creates every other monad, is separated off from all the other monads, and we'll go into what defines the characteristics of this monad, but also all the monads in a second. The second tier of monads are spirit monads. 2 spirit monads. The third tier are, what are they? Oh yeah, soul monads. And then the last one are basic monads. So spirit monads, yeah?
Wait, sorry, can you go back to, you said that he like deduced that there has to be an external God, but like what was his rationale behind that? Do you know like what his...
Yeah, I will go into that and more in a second, but primarily Leibniz says that if there are self-sufficient monads, and there are an infinite amount of self-sufficient monads because there must be, to make up what we deem to be reality, there must be a being who, or being, quote unquote, a self-sufficient, or a supreme monad that creates and destroys those other monads, because that question cannot be answered by the natural world. If we cannot have, okay, so like, for instance, how do things exist, how do we make things in humanity, in the natural world? How do we make things?
Like, you mean how do humans make things, or how do...
Or how are things made in the natural world?
In the natural world, like what type of...
I guess through like time and like a lot of...
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on the type of thing you want.
Okay.
Like, just give me an example, I suppose.
Here's an example. Alright, I have a remote and a marker, and I'm going to put them together, and now I'm going to call it a globity, okay?
Yeah.
So this globity now exists because I've created it. But how is the globity created? It was created through an interaction of two other things, and Leibniz tells us that things only exist in that they are self-sufficient monads and illusions of things because they're non-natural and non-physical, meaning that in the natural world things cannot be created or destroyed. If I break my pen or something, or if I break my globity, sorry, it's a funny word to say.
If you separate it apart.
If I separate apart, then it's not monads. It's not a monad because the monad never existed, and we've already deduced that monads do exist. So that's logically impossible, and thus the creator or destroyer of monad must be some supreme monad because there's no other way for that to exist.
I think maybe the reason is that there isn't really such a monad is just a figment of our perception. It's not an actual idea. So therefore, like there's no necessary a God that created or destroyed the monad. The monad was just a way that we experience our world. We think of it as it never existed in the first place.
Ourselves as spirit monads, which is what we are. We're humans. We're spirit monads. Our perception is dictated by a script, according to Leibniz, that God writes beforehand of the interaction between monads, which is not actually happening, but is rather a simulation, which we'll get into in a moment. Sorry, soul monad. Let me just define this real quick, and then I'll get back into it more.
Yeah.
Did you have a question?
Oh no, I was just going to ask, what's the difference between the spirit and the soul monad?
Perfect. Soul monads are animals, non-human animals, which Leibniz says still have consciousness because every monad has consciousness, but have a different degree of consciousness in that they're not able to, they're not like as self-aware of their own consciousness, i.e. they're not able to rationally think about their consciousness and deduce abstract thinking through language, yeah?
How does he know that? Because I feel like there has been a lot of evidence that there's a lot of actual self-awareness with other organisms and animals that actually do have their own types of languages that they communicate with each other with. Even like apes and stuff have been able to communicate with humans even in sign language, and there's like a lot of evidence recently that they do have a lot of self-awareness, so I don't really know how you can...
So I'm differentiating language from communication using Noam Chomsky's theory of language. Essentially, language can be defined as a separate sense through which we experience and interpret the world. It's a degree of processing, but there's not, there doesn't need to be a set difference between spirit and soul monads. It's a gray area, right? And so there are just varying degrees of awareness, which there's even a gray area here. And so these aren't like scientifically defined. These are open to the whims of science. And so non-human animals may not be correct. Maybe it's non-mammals or something like that. I don't know. But just as an example. What? Or just as an example, yeah. But basically there are stratas, and that those stratas exist to differentiate levels of consciousness,
so
or levels of awareness.
Whatever categories they fall into, there's still these levels.
Yeah. The last one are basic monads, which are everything else, like plants, rocks or something, which also have perception according to monad. And remember, it's not perception as in they're seeing things and hearing things and feeling things, but it's perception as in they have a grand divine script written for them through which they experience and interact with the world, quote unquote. Yeah?
But plants actually do feel things though, like they actually do detect things.
Yeah. And same with tomatoes. Tomatoes actually like their own warnings.
I get that. That has nothing to do with the distinction that Leibniz is making, because Leibniz will say the same thing for humans. Humans actually do feel stuff. No, they don't. Leibniz is saying that we don't actually feel anything, we don't actually experience anything, or we do, but we don't in the physical sense, but rather it's all simulation by God. And so Leibniz will say that there's divine scripts written for each and every monad in which you can differentiate, and in which the monads are distinguishable through the qualia, but like constantly shifting and constantly evolving qualia. And so what's the reason for this simulation needing to occur? Right? The first one is that monads can't interact with each other. We already went through this earlier with the globity example. If monads interacted with each other, or here's another example, like heat transfer. Yeah. If I have like a hot liquid here, hot liquid, and then I was to pour it into my water bottle, and that heat transfers, Leibniz theorizes that for an instantaneous moment in time, even if it's not quantifiable and even if you can't measure it, there needs to be a time when heat is being transferred, when the qualia property of heat is being transferred from hot to cold, that it has no body, that it has no thing that it's manifesting in. And Leibniz theorizes that that's impossible. You can't have heatness without heat to occupy it, which means, yeah?
Wait, I don't really see how you arrive at that, because when it transfers from hot to cold, it's not like, it's like, he's imagining it shifting over and it goes like, the way it works is it's just, there's kinetic energy that just
well, it's a
builds up.
heatness would be a theoretical property, i.e. a theoretical part of the monad. But monads are not even theoretically divisible, much less physically divisible, which means that that's impossible, right? And so they have a singular holistic qualia that's constantly shifting and evolving through a pre-written divine script of how each and every monad, which by the way there are infinite of them, need to unfold, that simulate an illusion of interaction, an illusion of natural experience and physical manifestation of the world. Last thing that we'll go over before next time, sorry, I have it notes here. Where is it? Oh yeah, the principle of sufficient difference. You might be asking why are monads, last thing, we only have 2 minutes, so principle of sufficient difference, I'll just write that here. Principle of sufficient difference. Basically, I have a question. If 2 monads are infinitely small, they don't have material manifestation, and they only have one property, then one property of qualia, then how are not all monads not the same? How are they not sufficiently different because they don't have variable, or because they don't have properties that might be different? For instance, how might a monad of me be different from a monad of you? Why are we not all just one substance, one monad? Yeah?
I think the supreme monad probably simulated those differences itself.
Well, exactly, and the simulated differences are those pre-written divine scripts with the constant evolution and change of that qualia. And so that qualia, in the past of that qualia, as well as the future of that qualia, even if for one instantaneous moment the qualias of 2 monads are the same, the overall long-term qualias must be different, which creates infinite difference, which means that there are infinite monads and not one single substance. Yes?
I mean, we have evolutionary justifications for why these monads are developed in certain ways. Like, I feel like I just don't really see why you need to have a divine strip, because like you can imagine that these things could be created by like a process. Like for example, if you have a process of... Not
if it's non-physical though.
But I feel like an issue I have with a lot of this is I feel like a lot of this is just kind of like the human perception of a thing. Like for example, hot versus cold is literally just how does it feel in relation to your own body temperature, right? And
yeah, but that perception can't exist insofar as the eyes or the touch sensory parts of you don't exist, because it would need to require composite monads, which are not a thing. There is no, basically, there's no empty space in monadology, in the monadic universe. There's no empty space, but rather there are just monads that interact with each other, and the empty space is an illusion. We'll go, we'll actually...
Yeah, I agree with that part.
I'm buying Monadology, I'm going to read it soon. I've just been reading this through what I've scoured on the internet, and there's like a few journals on it I read. But I'm going to buy that, and then I'll go over that more in depth. And then we can have a panel on that later where we talk about the differences in perception and how that influences our concept of monadology. Alright, we good?